Hello, everyone. Good day, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for the time and for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nam, and I am a Director of Research and Development with the Internet Center for Complex Project Management, ICCPM. Very briefly, ICCPM was established in 2007 by the Austrian government. It's now a not-for-profit, member-based organization with a mandate to build capability in complex project delivery across many industries sectors. We have our headquarters in Canberra with members distributed globally, and we do many things many of you have seen on our website, one of which is a monthly webinar. And with our absolute pleasure today to introduce you Dr. Gary Smith. Gary is a senior system expert with Airbus Defense and Space UK. He has more than 20 years experience working in projects, commercial, but also many things to do with telecommunication infrastructure. Gary is also a member of INCOSI, and if you know INCOSI, the International Council for System Engineering, and he is a qualified system expert there with INCOSI. Gary used to lead two international federations for system research conversations. I think back was in 2016 and 2018 in Linz, Austria. And I'm also part of the IFSR, I recall it, that's where we met. Gary also a vice president for the International Society for System Sciences, we call IHPS, VB in 2019. And Gary was a key bridge, a connection, as we call it, between INCOSI and IHPS. Later on, he will talk more about basically many of us know INCOSI is more about hard systems, and IHPS is more about soft systems, system thinking. And Gary has been, in the last few years, played a really vital role in terms of building a bridge between the two. And in July 2023, Gary was elected as the president-elect for the IHPS. So he will be leading the IHPS in 2024-2025. So that is our speaker today. Before I hand over to Gary, just very quick housekeeping points. Before I go to this, this is recorded for our other members who cannot attend today. And there's the Q&A function you can see at the bottom. So feel free to put any question if you wish. Do not stop Gary when he's talking. And then we would have 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A as well. So thank you, Gary, for putting up the ICCPM act on this. Is the traditional custodians of the land we work on in the Australian Capital Territory, ACT, and recognize any people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and region. We act on this and respect their continuing culture and the contributions they make to the life of this city and these regions. Thank you very much again, Evan, for the time. And for you, Gary, thank you for getting up early and spending time with us. So it's back to you, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the introduction, Nam, and for the invitation. So just before I start, I'd like to express that what I'm going to be talking about are my views and opinions. I am here on behalf of the ISSS. I'm not representing Airbus Defence and Space in this talk. So this is essentially the contents that I'm going to be going through. There's an introduction. I'm going to be looking at the understanding of the project start and the assumptions that we make. Look at a little bit of organizational complexity and dysfunction. I then go into the relationship between project management and system science. And then I'll talk about efforts towards an enterprise of system science and its relationship with project management. So just to sort of set the scene, the impact of size, complexity, and confusion in projects. There's a regular report from the Standish Group which looks at the success of, in particular, IT project performance, and there's there's definitely a relationship between the complexity of the projects and their ability to succeed. The more complex the project, the more chances there are for projects to utterly fail, to be challenged in terms of not meeting time, quality, and cost, and only about 35% are deemed successful. And this trend has not really changed that much since the report started. And then when we look at mega projects, really large projects, there's a really good book from Flyberg, which is How Big Things Get Done, which is a recent publication. And he has a massive database on mega projects containing 16,000 projects from 20 different diverse fields. And he's found that a staggering 91% of projects go over budget, over schedule, or both. And worse, less than 1% of projects are actually completed on time and on schedule and actually deliver the promises. So the impact of size, complexity, and confusion in projects is really quite amazing, really. So this sets the context. So there's the premise that systems thinking is actually something that can help. And there have been a number of different publications, and I'm just highlighting two of them here. Systems Thinking in Innovation, Project Management, and another paper, Systems Thinking, Taming Complexity in Project Management. So the key finding in the first paper is that systems thinking methods provide the flexibility to manage innovationness, complexity, and uncertainty in innovation projects more successfully. And there's a quote from the other paper. Surprisingly, project managers do not seem to use simple systems thinking tools, even though these provide unique benefits in framing and problem solving that arise from multiple perspectives and relationships. Now, these papers both came out around about 2011, 2013. And I do think that things may have changed a little. There's another white paper that came out from the Association of Project Management in the UK, and this is more recent, and they've done quite a bit of thought. They put quite a bit of thought towards systems thinking and project management, and they framed it quite nicely. So they show a relationship between number of components, number of interactions, and they've looked at simple, complicated, dynamic, and complex, and they've shown a relationship between complexity and systems thinking. What they've also done is they've identified in this white paper a number of different, let's say, tools and methodologies for systems thinking, which they found have been in use within the project management community. And they've showed that the place of these tools and methodologies through the overall system development life cycle. So there has been quite a bit of work looking at systems thinking in project management. What is systems thinking? And this is a slide I used quite a few years ago, and it represents my perspective on systems thinking. So I think that systems thinking is what you have to do when you're faced with the inexplicable. It's when your mind does not necessarily have the level of understanding needed to be able to fully comprehend a situation. What systems thinking does is it changes the way you think, and it improves your understanding. And there's this quite nice quote from Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean. The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Do you understand? And the subject of systems thinking is systems. And the perspective of system science is that systems are essentially everywhere and everything. Everything in the universe is a system, and everything in the universe is also a part of something greater. And that concept is known as holarchy. This is a really nice diagram from Christopher Chase showing the diversity of systems in our universe: natural systems, social systems, human civilization systems, and biological systems. Each of us is a biological system. So just a little bit more about my background so you can see where I'm coming from. Originally, I was an analytical chemist, so I've been quite influenced by chemistry. I went into relational database systems, then went into software and systems engineering, moved into project management for quite some time. So I was a member of the APM, and I worked with Paul Cornell on a booklet called A Consolidated Approach to Lifecycle Management, which reflected some of the work and experience we'd had at Marconi Corporation. I've also published a number of papers on biosystems and papers on things like cancer, inflammation, and sepsis, and you know, those kind of things. I contributed as a reviewer to a really nice book, which was an outcome of an alliance from PMI, INCOSE, and MIT, which was integrating project management and systems engineering. I am an INCOSE ESEP and a member of INCOSE, and we have the Systems Engineering Handbook, which is, you know, a rich source of resources for understanding systems and how to develop them. And I'm also obviously, you know, involved with the ISSS. And during my course of research with system science, Brigitte Daniel Allegro and I published a little booklet called Exploring the Branches of the Systems Landscape, and we created something which is called the systems tree. So I'm going to use the systems tree now just to give you some idea of the systems thinking heuristics that we know about. And this is just one publication. There are at least 20 different works on and frameworks on systems thinking, and this was the one that we put together back in 2016. The branches of the tree represent essentially the attitudes of the systems thinker. So this is almost like the ways or the habits of the systems thinker. It relates quite nicely, for instance, to the Waters Foundation, who have the habits of the systems thinker. And the roots represent the things that the systems thinker thinks about when they're considering systems. So things like boundary, hierarchy, influences, dynamics, cycles, functions, etc. We also put together something called the anti-systems tree, which is essentially the opposite. And this represents almost like the shadow of the tree. So we have unfounded concepts and we have traps in thinking. So this is just to give you a feeling of what systems thinking is all about. Okay, so one key aspect of things that we think about when we're systems thinking is life cycle and cycles. And this is a typical project life cycle, going through the expenditure of the effort, the various different phases of the project, the delivery of the solution, the maintenance of the solution, and then the withdrawal of the solution. And this project life cycle is something which helps us a lot in our project management. As we go through that life cycle and those early stages, we go through something called the estimating funnel, where we start off with that overall concept, that dream of what we want to achieve. And we have a level of uncertainty in terms of our estimates for time, quality, and cost, which can be as high as plus 80% in terms of uncertainty. And as you go through those project phases of concept, feasibility, planning, and then the launch or the kickoff of the project, you get down to a point, if you've done your job well, of actually understanding really deeply what the scope is, how it's going to be achieved, and what effort and resources you actually need to deliver. So there's a lot of systems thinking that takes place prior to that project launch. And there's two questions I want to ask. Does systems thinking really end here? And also, when does the project really start? Does the project start when you've got that agreement on time, quality, and cost? Or does the project start right at the very beginning during those conceptualization phases? And if the project manager comes on board at that point of time, quality, and cost definition, can we really be certain that the job in those early stages has been done right? Because what we often experience in the rush to get on contract is during that sales and marketing phase, let's say, a time, cost, quality triangle is conceived. But then when the project manager comes on board, it turns out there are quite a few surprises, and the project is a lot more complex than we anticipated. And this then leads to all sorts of problems. And then there's another handover from the project into the operational phase. And the project manager, they want to get that damn project finished, and it's obviously a dam. But when they deliver the project and the solution, sometimes we find out that it's actually not fit for purpose, or it doesn't meet the actual expectations. And again, there are lots and lots of examples of this, and one of them is the Wobbly Bridge, which was delivered in London as part of the Millennium Project. So there has been some analysis done on misunderstandings and their impact. And this was something that was done in the context of the INCOSE Project Management SE Integration Working Group. We did several workshops with project managers and chief engineers from various different domains. So it wasn't just defence and space, it wasn't just aeronautics, it covered power, infrastructure, energy. So it was looking at programs and projects in many different domains. We used COSISMO as the basis for looking at these different levels of assumptions and misunderstandings. And I've got two examples here that I'm going to show you. Project A is an example where the engineering cost exceeded only 20%. And we have another example where the engineering cost exceeded 500%. So this is a project that went absolutely severely over the time, cost, budget constraints. So these are different types of understanding, requirements understanding, the understanding of the overall solution, the level of the service requirements, etc., etc. The red are the assumptions which were made prior to contract, and the blue is the actual experience during the delivery. So the only difference between this one, the one that went well, was the level of understanding of the solution. It was predicted or assumed that there would be a high understanding of the architecture because a lot of effort had actually been put into that. But what actually turned out was that the architectural understanding was only nominal. And this led to this increase of 20%. In this other project, there was a vast difference between the levels of understanding which were assumed and the actual experience. And when you multiply all of these different factors up, COSISMO would have predicted 5.33 times the amount of effort needed. And indeed, that correlated quite well with the 500% overrun which was actually experienced. And we did this on something like 35 different projects, and we got similar correlations throughout. So I know it's only correlation, but it's pretty indicative. So the understanding phases are really essential, and this is using this paper here as a starting point, but it shows where faults are introduced, where the faults are found, and the relative cost for fault removal. If you fix your faults over this side during your preparation and your understanding, then it's relatively inexpensive. It's relatively inexpensive to fix those problems before you start to really implement and produce. Direction on the implementation is set here. So during these early phases, it's really important to explore, to think, to test your assumptions, to iterate in your planning, and to continuously think again until you've got to the point where you really have got a real understanding of what you need to do. And this is reflected again in Flybird's book, where he talks about thinking slow and acting fast as a key heuristic for delivering those mega structure projects successfully. Again, when does the project really start? Does the project really start here, or does the project really start right at the very beginning? And again, this is where your systems thinking is most important. Now, there's a phenomenon which is called technical debt, which is essentially postponing those understandings until a later point. Oh, well, it's kind of like, oh, we'll worry about that later, yeah, or we'll do the design later. We need to start implementing. You know, we haven't got time to define the requirements. We've just got to deliver something, yeah. And what happens is you end up with really high levels of technical debt when you follow that kind of approach. And also the way that we do business, you know, with the RFPs, RFQs, you know, those commercial constraints, it's not really conducive to having a good understanding. And what often happens is, you know, both sides minimize the effort during the bid and proposal phase. And as a result, we end up with a curve that looks like this, with lots of technical debt. When actually the best thing to do is to adequately prepare. And, you know, you would end up with an ideal which looks something like this. You know, you start delivering after, but all of the preparation is done before. The other thing which has a massive impact on your ability to deliver effectively and efficiency is your organizational qualities. And COSISMO also includes a number of different factors related to things like team cohesion, the capabilities of the team, etc., etc. And the higher your capability, the more effective and the more efficient you will be. So this is something else which has to be taken into account. You know, when you're preparing the project, it's really important that you spend the time putting together your team, putting in place your processes, putting in place your tools. And because if you start doing this after you've won the project or the project kicks off, not only are you trying to deliver the project, but you're also trying to build the team and your organization. And this can have a major impact on project success. Another nice piece of work from the PMI and COSI MIT Alliance was this guide to lean enablers for managing engineering programs. And they were highlighting in their report the importance of program planning and how insufficient program planning leads to reactive program execution and firefighting. But again, I'll highlight again this key activity up front, which is the acquisition and contracting processes, because this is a major influence on that. And as Bogdanov said, a disordered whole is practically less than the sum of its parts. So the consequences of all of this lack of preparation and the lack of systems thinking is you'll end up with a situation that looks like this. And these clouds, what we call system pathologies, come from the work of ISSS, because these are the kind of things that we don't just see in programs and projects. It's things that we see in our everyday lives as well. And there is a logical arrangement of these clouds, these pathologies, but these are the kind of things that we experience. Now, by applying systems thinking, the premise is that we can turn that previous chart on its head, and now we have smart business acquisition and contracting practices, effective planning, purposeful metrics, processes optimized and integrated, and ultimately projects that enable good and profitable business. So this is the premise. This is the offering of systems thinking. Now, one example of systems thinking would be a project manager, for instance, who is leading a project which is following the purple curve. And with situational awareness, understanding that you are in that kind of situation, you do have some choices about what you're going to do and how you're going to lead your team. What you could do is you could continue along the curve. Yeah, and you will end up with an overspend which looks like this. Yeah, or you could take the choice to actually restart the project or do something different, invest in some thinking and some revision in terms of your plans, put some extra effort in, and go through a curve which looks more like this. Now, you're not going to recover the overall situation. You know, if you've done that right from the very beginning, you're not going to recover completely the situation, but it's not going to be as bad as it would be if you just let it continue. So, you know, this is leadership. This is being aware, being brave, obviously being persuasive, because there's going to be a load of stakeholders you're going to have to convince, but also being constructive. And the longer you delay in recognizing the situation and addressing it, the worse the result will be, and also your ability to improve on it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory and the relationship of theory with practice. So we have the theoretical domain over here, which is essentially, you know, scientific foundations. And what we have over here is the empirical domain, the domain of experience. And there's a relationship between the two. And this is one of the diagrams I've been using to explain how to bridge theory and practice, which was part of my role at the ISSS. So what we've got over here is we've got conceptualization in terms of pure thought, the building of theoretical models. And then those theoretical models then provide the basis for principles for how you act. But these principles are grounded in the theory. You then operationalize these principles and put them in practice. So that this is one way of developing ideas about how to do stuff. There's another way of learning, which is learning by experience. And this is the domain of heuristics. So you don't necessarily have a theoretical foundation for explains why things do what they do and act like they do, but the mere fact that these things work and these patterns work can lead to new inspiration and the ability to conceptualize, ask the reason why, and then develop new theoretical models or improve on theoretical models. So there's this relationship which is going on. So I've been taking a look at PMBOK 6 and 7, and I think there's been a radical shift between the two, and I think we're moving away from a more reductive, more reductionist, mechanical, process-orientated approach to one which is more systemic. And PMBOK is now organized in terms of principles and domains rather than process groups and knowledge. I think actually there's still a lot that is useful in PMBOK 6 in terms of those things, but if you combine them with the principles and domains, I think there's actually potentially a synergy there. But the thing I'd like to point out is that the principles relate to things like stakeholders, values, systems thinking, leadership, tailoring, quality, complexity. Now, I mentioned the Flyberg book, which I think is actually really good. I think it should be mandatory reading for all project managers and chief engineers, to be honest. And what Flyberg does, he shows in his book a number of heuristics for project management based on the experience that he's gathered from all of the works that are represented in the book and his database. And these, you could consider these to be, again, complementary to these things in the PMBOK. And the thing I'd also like to emphasize is there are many more academic publications on this topic of project management heuristics and principles. These are just a few. Obviously, this is obviously most important because, you know, it's part of the PMI, but there's a lot more out there. Yeah, and if you're using PMI, should you really ignore these? You know, how do you blend these things together so that they actually work in synergy with each other? How, you know, making them complementary. So one way of bringing these things together is to put them into context. And one of the things we've been doing with system science is we're looking at how we can organize it. So that, because in system science, there's lots and lots of stuff. There's lots and lots of theories and methods and you know, concepts. How do we bring it all together as a whole? And we put together this this way of organizing stuff. So we have, first of all, knowledge about systems, and this represents essentially nature's transversal patterns. You can think of these things as the roots and the connections between the roots that I showed you in the systems tree earlier. So we have four different quadrants. We've got the context of things, entities. We've got the mechanisms which lead to those entities coming into being. And when those things come into being, there are emergent properties. Because the nature of systems is you get an emergence. New things arise when parts come together. And we can overlay that with, you know, the more traditional quadrant of knowing why, knowing what, knowing how, and wisdom. And wisdom is essentially an emergent property again. So what's on the right-hand side can overlay on top of the left. And when we're doing systems thinking, we are engaging with systems, and we can frame our systems thinking principles, heuristics, practices in this frame of engaging with systems. And when we look at this example here, for instance, of demonstrating leadership behaviors, this is a definition of what to do in terms of a principle. But it's helpful to understand the context, knowing why you're doing that. And it's also useful to know how to do it in terms of methods and tools, and when to do it in terms of wisdom. So that's what I'm going to try and do as I go through these slides. I'm going to try and frame those principles and heuristics and see how we can bring the heuristics from Flyberg and the PMI principles together into a common framework. So first of all, what I'm showing here now is I've taken the principles and the heuristics, and I've organized them in terms of knowing why, knowing what, knowing how, and wisdom. And I'll explain how I've done that as I go through. But what I'm also showing in the center is these are kind of like, as I've described here, macro environmental context for the heuristics and the principles. So down here we've got passion, philosophy, social. So these things are more down this space. Technical, theoretical, and philosophical up here. Technical, action potential, and decision making over here. And down here we've got decisions, design aesthetics, and the social. And these things actually relate to, if any of you are familiar with PESTLE. So PESTLE is down the center and on the right hand side, but there are three other, I don't know, motivators or powers which are on the left. So these are more abstract, whereas these are much more tangible, practical. Okay, so what I'm showing you now is, again, the know why, know what, know how, and wisdom. I'm showing you those powers or environmental contexts, and I'm showing you the pathologies that I showed you earlier. Now, what I'm also showing on the diagram now are pathways that help to resolve the pathologies through the enactment of what these are, which are essentially transformational powers. These are the motivators of change in the context of systems. So we've got, you know, you can resolve confusion and complexity by generating hypotheses, and that draws on the power of theory. You can resolve the issue of not seeing the connection flow of causality by planning ahead. Yeah. What we've done behind all of these different arrows is we've mapped on something like 20 different works on systems thinking, and brought those heuristics together in terms of a single pathway. So we've provided some context for all of those heuristics. What I'm going to now do is I'm now going to show you how the project management heuristics and principles map onto this overall flow. And this is a dynamic situation which is going on all of the time in our programs and projects. So, you know, here we've got, let's focus on the center. Yeah. So giving voice to future possibilities resolves no vision of the future situation. And there's a couple of principles here. Enable change to achieve the envisaged future state. So that's a connection between planning ahead, no voice of the future possibilities. So giving voice to future possibilities. Effectively engaging with stakeholders is down here. You know, making friends and keeping them happy, connecting with others, developing systems knowledge, being diligent, respectful, and a caring steward. So this is how the principles and the heuristics map onto the overall schema. And then when we move on to the opposite, which is the anti-systemic pathways, these are the pathways that actually promote the pathologies and to some extent abuse the powers. So in the center, we have reluctance to change to retain the establishment, which promotes no vision of the future situation, manipulation of information, and benefiting the parts and not the wholes, which is essentially corruption. Yeah, that's taking us in the wrong direction. Manipulation of relationships. You know, so all of these different pathologies are promoted by these anti-systemic pathways. And again, we can overlay the principles and the heuristics onto this, but now it's in the context of essentially mitigating those pathways. So focusing on value, addressing lack of information of innovation by hiring a master builder, building with Lego, which increases essentially the efficiency, building climate into your model, into your project. You know, asking why, taking the outside view. So this is this is a candidate. I'm not saying that this is completely right. This is just giving you an idea of placing the principles and the heuristics into context and the value of doing so. Because the practical outcome of systems thinking is these work products. These are the things that are actually created when you're applying systems thinking. You're creating collective wisdom. You're defining a vision, mission, and objectives for the program. You're defining the plans. You're putting in place a design. You're defining an architecture, which is your structure of what to achieve. You know, when you do systems thinking, you create illuminating concepts. You define risks. You're looking at your snags and change requests, etc. So these are all the things that are produced when you do systems thinking. And again, we can place the project management principles and heuristics onto this. And now we can see the place and the contribution that project management can make when they're applying their principles and heuristics. And there may be many more. Now, if we can understand the relationship between the principle, the work product, we can also start to think about what methods and tools are actually applicable in relationship to those principles and those work products. So this is the other advantage of having a frame for that systems thinking. Now, one of the reasons why I was delighted and thankful for Nan to give me the opportunity to give you this talk was because I want to invite you to contribute to an enterprise of system science. The ISSS is a global community connected through systems theory, science, and practice. And what we're trying to do, and you don't necessarily have to be a member of the ISSS to contribute to this, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring people and organizations together so that we can essentially create system science with the same, you know, analogous to physics and chemistry. Yeah, physics and chemistry, it's a collaboration where there's no single owner, but it's a global culture, if you like, where people are collaborating together. And if we can bring our organizations and people together, we can really realize the value of systems thinking, and we can apply that to essentially change the world to be the place that we really want it to be. You know, many organizations believe in systems approaches for essentially a better world to live in. And this is something that I want to do through the ISSS. We have these objectives: to foster the integration of transversal knowledge, to promote the unity of science through improving communications, to facilitate the transfer of concepts, laws, and models across disciplines and professions, including project management, to encourage the development of theoretical models where they're lacking, to reduce the duplication of theoretical efforts across disciplines and professions, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what we're trying to achieve. Now, complex endeavors are best served with systems thinking. And, you know, again, we've got the know why, know what, know how, and the established wisdom. And this overlays really nicely onto the Kinefin framework, where we have perceived chaos, perceived complexity, perceived complicated, and the perceived clear. And the role of the project manager, you know, the champion, the commander, the inspector, the composer, is really key to moving the team around this overall map. You know, understanding why, understanding what, how, and establishing the wisdom. That's essentially it now.
Excellent, Gary. Thank you very much. It is extremely rich, very comprehensive, and it's wonderful to see the way you bring theory and practice together. The many years that you've been through working with many agencies, IHS, Airbus, Incosi, and other places. So have wanted to comment at the end, but I think I would like to invite our participant to ask questions or comment. If I think Shankar puts her hand up first, so please go ahead, Shankar. And the question in the Q&A from Dave as well. You can look at it later.
I know. I was trying to find the clapping sign, but I found the question hand. One hand clapping, according to Zen.
Thanks, Shankar.
So that clapping from you and Shankar, not the raising hand. People can so raise your hand if you wish to ask questions, please. Thank you.
I'd like to join Shankar in saying fabulous presentation. I think it's so full of all of those things that we need to be thinking about. But my overarching feeling is that anything we can do to inject some science into this whole world of complexity with such a practical understanding of all the facets and things that we need to be thinking about, I think is so much needed, and in particular to focus people on better leadership all the way through the whole the beginning to end of a project, which, as you say, Gary, starts way earlier than people tend to start doing anything kind of practical on this kind of thinking. So I think it's something that we need to be injecting into project management at a much earlier stage and teaching people as well.
Thank you, Val. Thank you very much. Richard, put your hands up, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of the confounding things that I experience in terms of theory to practice is that a lot of the time, and I won't name who, but I'm working with a particular client right now. It's a fairly big job. It's over a long period of time. It's in a very, very complex area. It's not projects per se, but all the same principles apply. None of the people I'm working with, although they're all very experienced and clever and they're dedicated, they're good people, none of them have a background in systems science or systems indeed at all. And none of them, if I talk to them about systems, the first thing they think, the first response I get is, what are you talking about? And so for me to try, and I don't have the time, and they don't have the interest or the time to automatically go on a journey of discovery of that over a period of time to understand the nature of either concepts or the theory that comes from the principles and the theory and the practice that comes from it. And so what I end up having to do is essentially operate in a way myself that causes them to get into to deal with the systems, the systemic aspects, but without them being a partner in that. Right? I was going to ask Gary, you know, when in this transfer of concepts and theory to practice, is that an experience you have as well? That you often have to, you actually don't have people to talk, you're working with people who don't understand what you're saying at all, or very much at all, even though they're good people.
Yeah, yeah. So what I've found through experience is you don't talk about the concepts or the theory, you demonstrate it. You know, so you know when you're running roundtables or you're doing you know, systems maps, you don't give them the theory, you just invite them to participate, and they learn through doing. That seems to be the best way of doing it. Obviously you have to tailor your approach based on the participants and the audience. You know, the approach I would take with a group of systems engineers would be different, you know, working with, you know, another group, you know. So yeah. You always have to take into account that context.
I think my experience is very similar, and as it happens, that client I'm working with right now, I'm doing some risk work, and so I've proposed to them a very different form of risk register, which they've actually like, but they don't know why I went there. They don't really know why I created a risk register with no probability in the no column for probability or likelihood, and it scares the crap out of professional risk managers, but doesn't scare the crap out of my client because they don't know any better.
Right, yeah. They're just glad to see it working.
Yeah, they just want to see it. Is it practical? Can we use it? Does it make sense to us? The other thing that I do is I'm working at all levels of risk management with them, and obviously that includes strategic risk, however you want to define that. And I've introduced them to the idea, as I did that, of systemic risk, and I defined it for them and just said, you know, what I meant by that. And they now have a strategic risk register which has what you'd call traditional strategic risk, but it also has a specific area for systemic sources of risk. And yet they haven't been on the conceptual journey. But I think it is demonstrating through practice, but sometimes you've got to take the horse to water and hopefully they'll be thirsty and they'll drink, but they won't necessarily understand why they're drinking. But maybe in hindsight, they will be happy to go on another journey of exploration later. They get used to doing things that are different, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think there's other questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Sebastian, please. I saw the hands up.
Thanks, Gary, for your presentation. I've been thinking about systems thinking in project management for a while, and I've written a little opinion piece which I sent to NAM a couple of months ago. Hopefully it'll get included somewhere. You were talking about PMBOK before. I've tended to see PMBOK as a very non-systemic sort of publication. It treats those 10 disciplines as individual entities. I've tended to see the 10 areas, if you're looking at scope, cost, time, and quality, they're the objective functions that you're trying to meet, constraints, you can see them that way. The HR, comms, stakeholder, and procurement are really the enablers to reach those objective functions or discipline. And then you've got integration on the top, which is really the systems thinking, which brings all those elements together. So that's the platform, that's the framework that I've always thought in project management in practice as those being the elements of the framework. So I see all those 10, those 9 disciplines, scope, cost, quality, time, HR, stakeholders, comms, procurement, and risk are all the different elements which make up the system. And they're all related to each other. And for every project, the relationships are different, and the relationships kind of change as we go through the project life cycle. So I see the integration as really the systems thinking in project management. So with the model that you've proposed, what are the elements and what are the relationships which make up the system?
The system in terms of the organization, or the system in terms of the
Yeah, because I mean, what I've put forward there is only one way of thinking about one way of systems thinking in project management. It's not, and I'm just trying to use to, I guess, to build on PMBOK. But it's not the only way of systems thinking in project management at all. So,
yeah.
So if I was to, the framework that you've put forward, if we look at systems as elements which have a relationship, which together form an objective, how does that fit into the framework that you've put in?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. So starting off with the organization of the project endeavor in terms of the people and the teams. There's a really nice piece of work from James Martin called The Seven Samurai, which was published in the context of Nkosi. And what that does is it looks at all of the systems that provide the context for the solution. So you've got the system of delivery, you've got the system of maintenance, you've got various different systems in terms of organizations that have to come together. And typically you only think of one of them, but actually all seven are really important. So that's worth looking at. Now, in terms of the system which is actually going to be the overall solution, what you're actually going to be delivering, as well as the overall architecture, which is the appreciation of the whole solution, you then have to start thinking about, well, what are all of the components that make it up? And what are those components made up of? So you have an overall system which is made of components, and those components are made of parts. And that comprises your overall design. Now, when we define our work breakdown structure, you need to have a work breakdown structure which represents the team which takes that global perspective. But for every one of those components and parts, you potentially have to have a team who are responsible for delivering that component or part. So there's a very tight relationship between the product breakdown structure, the work breakdown structure, and the organizational breakdown structure. And if you haven't defined those things before the project starts, traditionally starts, then you will have no real grasp of the cost, the time, or the real complexity of the solution. So again, this is all stuff you have to do beforehand before you start delivering.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, no, that helps. I still haven't seen a really good. I guess the way you've explained it there. I mean, you have a work breakdown structure, you have an organization, the work to be done, the product to be delivered, etc., etc. But I've never seen a really good way of breaking up a project, taking into account that it changes so much over a life cycle and how it metamorphizes and how that system may change and the relationships may change.
Yeah, that's true as well. I mean, the organization may well change as you go through the life cycle because the emphasis of the work changes as you go through. Yeah.
So I think perhaps, like you're saying, it could be the people, the tasks, the product. That's a simple framework that you could use and see how that changes over a life cycle.
Yeah.
And develop systems from that.
Excellent, thank you. I saw maybe you put your hand down, you put your hand down. Would you like to ask something or?
Well, I'd probably prefer to let one of the participants have a question. But I suppose it's that conversation around complex adaptive systems. And I suppose my question to Gary is, it was interesting that you're using, I suppose, PMBOK as the foundation, which has more of a structured project management approach as opposed to a complex adaptive system in complex projects approach. I'm sort of curious that you've, rather than taking that what is fit for purpose in that new environment and that whole life cycle approach. That it's interesting that you've used the existing framework to try and fit the systems approach into.
Well, the reason I picked the PMBOK was because it's probably the closest that we have to an international standard. I know that the IAPM also, you know, has a collective work. I used to be a member of the APM, so I'm familiar with that. The reason I chose PMBOK, so to be honest, was because I was aware of issue 6. I'd seen that some time ago, and my perspective on it was indeed very processed, very, you know, structured, very mechanical in its approach. Yeah. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to look at what PMBOK 6 was, and then say, okay, these are the things that we should be doing to it in order to make it more systemic, more adaptable, more evolvable, more tailorable, etc., etc.
Okay.
And then I started coming across some publications about PMBOK 7, and it seemed that there'd been a change to something which was more tailorable, more systemic. So I bought a copy and got it yesterday just to check. And indeed, I think it's quite encouraging. I think there's more that could be done, but it's definitely going in the right direction. Yeah, so that's why I chose PMBOK, because my anticipation was that it was going to be more mechanistic, reductionist, you know. But actually, I think things have improved.
So I'm going to be completely biased, encourage you to look at the new complex project leadership competency standards, which is more around approaching a project in that systemic way. And I definitely think there is a different way of thinking about.
Great. I'd love to see that, Naomi, if you could point me to it, because that was something I've looked at. But I'd be delighted to.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. We send to you straight away, Gary. I saw a comment in the Q&A. I don't know whether you can click on that, Gary, from Dave. The true comment from Dave. The second one is to thank you for the excellent concept. And then the first one, would you like to comment on the first question from Dave? Can you see that or not?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll read it. Systems thinking in PM is one side of the coin. It also requires a mature organizational environment to engage with systems thinking. Too often, PMs are asked to dumb things down, e.g. to a top 3, or find themselves with binary causation thinkers. Yes, I'd agree. Yeah. I think it just depends. You know, I wouldn't label all organizations like that. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, when you look at I don't know, SpaceX, for instance, you know, everyone in the industry points to SpaceX in terms of its innovation, you know, its ability to do things agilely, you know, fast. You know, I think the quote is something like fail fast, and I can't remember what it fails fast or something. I can't remember, but basically it's an encouragement of innovation. So I think it does depend on the organization that you're in, but yeah, there's still a lot of organizations which are very reductionist, mechanistic in their approaches.
Shankar.
That don't embrace systems thinking.
Shankar, you muted. You put your hands up and you muted. Would you mind turning on so we can hear you?
Okay. I was just thinking about what Richard was saying. It's actually difficult because I actually teach a course called System Thinking for Project Manager, but now I teach all managers. And we've been doing that for almost 15 years now. And we actually include ask project manager to stop thinking breakdown. Look at the forest and the trees. So some people get it, some people don't. So I think system thinking is a way of thinking, and I used to teach that with Tim Haslett, who passed away a couple of years ago. Between him and me, he is a system thinker. I'm not a system thinker. I often go back to project management. but we have managed to pair up and teach that subject. I think system thinking does require a different way of, like Gary said, questioning, a lot of questioning. I think it's important to do system thinking. It's not easy.
Yeah. I might add that in my line of work, working in risk, we have a strong emphasis on what we call what we define as systemic risks, but behind all those is what we think of as systemic lead indicators. And to us, the ultimate systemic lead indicator, or just the ultimate lead indicator, are we likely to be successful? That lead indicator idea, right, is about capability. And if you like, competence, and you can go to the competency standards, right? But the competence isn't just about people being competent and their mindset and their skills. It's also about the competence of the systems of organization to be agile, to support people who are agile, to deal with complexity effectively, and to be simple when it's simple. What are those capabilities? And we look for those capabilities, and we say, you know what? Regardless of what you've got today, whether you've got a really good work breakdown or you haven't, or whether you've really done the homework to get to know what you're trying to do in your project or not, if you have the right competencies, if you have the right capabilities in your organization, in organizational terms, in systems, in culture, in people, in skills, then that's a great lead indicator that you're probably going to have more success rather than less. And what are those capabilities in a complex world? That's where we go.
Excellent. I think we have to wrap up very soon, but from my end, so just quick comments, Gary. First of all, thank you very much again for the time and for being with us. I do look forward on behalf of ICSPM to work closely with IHBS and INCOSI and Airbus in the very near future. At the same time, we would be happy to share with you our new competency standard. Either Naomi or myself would do it tonight. I do it actually after the talk, so you can look at that. But I'm so aware that even here in Australia, we started to see more the uptake from government agencies. For example, Department of Defense, for example, ATO, that is Australian Tech Office. They are more into system thinking. They would like to do training for their staff. Over there in the country, I'm aware that APM, they do have their system thinking SIG group, so that is quite strong with APM. The UK government they have the Office of Science, where system thinking is quite up there. So it's good to see that, as you said, trying to make system thinking become more mainstream, like chemistry, like physics in the future. That would be good. So thank you again for doing all of that, and we're so looking forward to work further with you in this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niall.
Yeah.
It was the delight. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for time, and then wishing you have a good day or good evening wherever you are. Again, thank you again for being with ICSPM. We look forward to seeing you more often in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
For the
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Priscilla.